Author Steven Krause, on the other hand, the role of antithetical writing in first-year composition courses offers two central tools that students can use to help structure their argument drafts: the antithesis and the hostile audience. If you haven't read this article already, please return to the Sakai site, download the article, and respond to the reading questions. In order to talk about the significance of the antithesis, I want to provide an example of a thesis statement. A ban on laptops in the writing classroom would improve students' academic performance in the classroom. So let's say I wanted to create an outline to support this thesis. So I'm going to imagine the first reason for the ban: the internet and access to multiple web technologies are addictive. The second reason: laptops distract students, which results in cognitive dissonance. Laptops reduce social participation and interpersonal communication. And the fourth reason: laptops distract professors as well as impede their ability to teach, listen to students, and engage in ongoing formative assessment. As I continue to structure my argument, I imagine what kinds of changes that would need to take place. So I would need to make policy changes in my syllabus. I then imagine the hostile audience at this point and what kinds of problems that would arise. So students with documented disabilities or students with handwriting problems might protest this ban. And then I imagine why the ban would be beneficial regardless. To know whether the thesis that I have created is an effective thesis, the first thing I want to do is simply create the opposite. So a ban on laptops in the writing class would improve student performance. So the opposite of that is that it would not improve student performance. And so it either A, would hurt their performance, or B, it actually would have no effect at all. And so are those two outcomes possible? Can someone defend and argue that in fact it could hurt students in the classroom? Sure, certain students, right? Students with particular documented disabilities, it would hurt their ability to learn the class content. And you could in fact argue that it would have no impact at all, that student grades would not go up or down as a result of this ban. So in fact, you could make a strong case for the antithesis. So if you have a good antithesis, that means you have a good thesis statement. And so then as I continue to build my argument, I can first imagine the supportive audience and writing to them first in my opening paragraphs. Think about the kinds of narratives, anecdotes, research, opinions, the language that I want to use in order to first connect with the supportive audience. Or maybe, depending on the situation, I might have to first write to a hostile audience. And so then I would have to imagine the kinds of narratives, anecdotes, research, tone, and so forth to write for this particular hostile audience, so that way they don't disregard my writing outrightly from the very beginning. Imagining that hostile audience will help you decide the tone, voice, evidence that you want to use. Then, of course, you may have to write for a mixed audience, and this would be a balance of both supporters as well as those who are antagonistic to your ideas. All right, so now let's apply the antithesis test to a weak thesis statement. So here's an example of a weak thesis statement. There are positive and negative results when teens use smartphones. Okay, so this is very similar to the type of thesis that many students write. There are pros and cons to using smartphones. Okay, so why is this considered a weak thesis statement? Because when you apply the antithesis test, you are arguing that there are not positive negative results. That kind of doesn't make any sense. Sure, you can say that they are neutral results and argue about neutral results, but in fact, this particular student is wanting to argue about the positive and negative results. So they're not saying that there are neutral results, right? So to argue the opposite here doesn't really make logical sense. We have then a red flag for a weak thesis statement. If we look at a revision of this thesis, we have Although apps like Snapchat have allowed teens to record their daily lives similar to a living journal, the types of composing that occurs on these apps do not encourage critical thinking or self-reflection, which are necessary skills for teens to excel academically. So the opposite of do not encourage would be it does encourage. So it actually does help with critical thinking. So can I argue that Snapchat can help with critical thinking? Sure, right? So I can use my own personal examples of that. Maybe I can find a study about that. But it makes sense to say it does encourage, and it makes sense to say it does not encourage. Once I applied the antithesis test to my thesis statement, now I can start to build my outline. So I perhaps want to talk about the use of social media in education. And then I imagine my audience to be those who are probably going to be supportive of my views, probably parents who are fed up with their teens using Snapchat all the time, and maybe fellow educators as well who are fed up with their students on their smartphones all the time. So that's my supportive audience. So if I was writing to them, I might want to start with some incriminating evidence about teens. But if I am writing to actual teens, my hostile audience, those that actually want to keep using their Snapchat and who feel that it's actually helping them become better critical thinkers, then I might want to provide some examples, narratives, maybe student examples of students using Snapchat creatively. And I already talked about who my hostile audience is. And then I start imagining the kinds of questions that my hostile audience might bring up, maybe what my supportive audience might bring up. And then I conclude here with my main purpose is to have teens engage in more critical thinking. In summary, both the antithesis and hostile audience test allow for student writers to evaluate the strength and effectiveness of your thesis, and it also helps you organize and structure an outline for your draft.